Kale had always prided himself on his independence. He wasn't one to rely on anyone for help. But today, as the wind howled and the rain lashed against his face, he wished he had a little more company on this journey. He was a traveler, a wanderer in search of a place to call home. But this storm had caught him off guard. Now, as the clouds gathered darker and thicker above, it seemed like even nature itself was determined to test his limits. The storm came out of nowhere, fierce and unforgiving. What had started as a gentle drizzle quickly escalated into a torrential downpour, forcing Kale to seek shelter wherever he could find it. He had wandered for hours through the dense, mist-filled forest, but all he could see was the swirling chaos of rain and wind. His clothes clung to his skin, soaked through with the cold water, and his feet ached from the rough terrain. Just when he thought he might not make it through the night, Kale spotted something in the distance, a dark opening in the side of a mountain, the shape of a cave. He had no choice but to head toward it. With renewed determination, Kale stumbled forward, nearly tripping on the wet ground as he pushed through the underbrush. As he approached the entrance of the cave, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. It was small, but it would provide some much-needed shelter. Without hesitation, Kale stepped inside. The inside of the cave was warm, much warmer than the bitter cold of the storm outside. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he could make out the shape of something curled up at the far end of the cave. A large pile of rocks and what looked like a nest of some sort. At first, Kale assumed it was a wild animal, perhaps a bear or some other creature, but as he got closer, he realized something far more unusual was lying there. A dragon. A baby dragon. It was smaller than the legends had described, but the creature's scales shimmered in shades of deep crimson, and its tiny wings fluttered weakly as it slept. The dragon's breathing was shallow, its little body rising and falling gently. Kale froze, his heart pounding. He had heard stories about dragons, creatures of myth, feared by many and admired by others, but he never imagined he would come across one, especially not a baby. For a long moment, Kale stood there, mesmerized by the sight. The dragon's scales glinted like fire in the flickering light of the cave. Its tiny form was so fragile, so vulnerable. It looked like it had been abandoned, left alone in this cave to fend for itself. He couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. Without really thinking about it, Kale crouched down near the dragon. He pulled out a small patch of dry meat from his bag, hoping that the scent might draw the creature's attention. The dragon stirred slightly at the sound of the bag rustling. Its golden eyes flickered open, and it blinked up at him, clearly startled. At first, the dragon made a low, defensive noise, like a small growl. But there was no real aggression in its eyes. It was just scared. Kale carefully extended the dry meat, trying not to make any sudden moves. "It's okay," he murmured softly, speaking to the dragon as if it could understand him. "I won't hurt you." The baby dragon hesitated, its eyes locked on Kale's face. There was a moment of silence before it slowly crept forward, sniffing the air curiously. Kale's heart skipped a beat when the creature's tiny nose brushed against the meat. Without warning, the dragon snatched the food from his hand. Swallowing it whole in a few quick bites, Kale chuckled nervously. "Well, you're hungry, aren't you?" he said under his breath, his initial fear melting away. He was still cautious, but the baby dragon seemed harmless. It had no more fight left in it. Perhaps it had been starving for days. The dragon licked its lips, its eyes narrowing as it looked up at him once more. Kale felt a strange sense of connection, like the little creature trusted him in that moment. It was a fleeting connection, one that didn't make sense, but it was there. The dragon nudged closer to him, pressing its tiny body against his leg. Kale didn't know what to do. He had always been alone. He had spent most of his life traveling from place to place, never staying in one place too long. But now, here was this baby dragon, alone and in need of protection. The impulse to help it was strong, even though he knew it would be risky. Dragons were not something humans often befriended, and yet this little one was looking at him with trust in its eyes. "I can't leave you here alone," Kale muttered, more to himself than to the creature. It was just a baby, and something about its small form and delicate presence tugged at his heart. He looked around the cave. There was no sign of the dragon's parents. No indication that it had come from a larger nest or a family. It was just here, lost in the storm, alone. Kale sighed, sitting down on a large rock. "You can stay with me for now," he said quietly, "but we'll need to get out of here soon." The baby dragon made a soft chirping sound, almost like a purr, and settled down next to him. It was clear that it had no intention of leaving him. Despite its initial wariness, it seemed to find comfort in his presence. As the storm raged on outside, Kale sat in the cave with the little dragon by his side. He didn't sleep much that night. His mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. The storm was showing no signs of letting up, and the valley around them seemed so isolated. But for now, the dragon was the only thing he had, and he couldn't just abandon it. Morning came, and the storm finally began to subside. The sky was still overcast, but the worst of the rain had passed. Kale stood up slowly, stretching his stiff limbs. The dragon, now awake, watched him with its big amber eyes. It still hadn't left his side. "You're not going anywhere, are you?" Kale asked with a small smile, even though he knew the answer. The dragon nuzzled his leg, as if to confirm it. It seemed like a strange bond was beginning to form between them. Something deeper than just shelter or survival, something Kale couldn't yet explain. But as he gathered his belongings and prepared to leave the cave, the dragon followed him. Its small steps mirroring his, Kale hesitated, looking back at the creature. The dragon had no sense of direction, no way of knowing where it was or where to go. It was still so young, and the valley around them was full of dangers. Kale didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: the baby dragon was not going to let him go. And for reasons Kale couldn't fully understand, he wasn't ready to let it go either. The morning after the storm was no better than Kale had hoped. The sky was heavy with clouds, the air thick with moisture, and the valley around him felt colder than it should have been. Still, the worst of the storm had passed, and Kale knew he had to keep moving. The dragon was beside him, following him like a shadow. It was strange. Kale had never been one to keep company for long, but this little creature felt like it belonged with him, as if fate had brought them together. He didn't know where it came from or what had happened to its family, but something about the dragon's trust in him made him feel like he was the only one who could help it with each step he took. The baby dragon was right behind him, trotting along at his heels. The creature was small, its tiny claws clicking against the stone and dirt of the valley floor. Kale had expected the dragon to be slow and clumsy, but it moved with surprising grace for such a young animal. The more Kale walked, the more he noticed that the dragon seemed to mimic his every move. When he stopped to rest, it did too. When he looked around to make sure no danger was near, it would look around too. Its golden eyes alert and focused. By midday, Kale had made little progress. The valley was bigger than it had first seemed, and every path seemed to lead to more wild terrain. He had no real sense of direction. There were no maps of these mountains. The only thing he had was instinct, and the further he walked, the more he felt like something was off. The land here was ancient, untamed. It was not the kind of place a traveler should wander into without knowing the dangers. Kale sat down on a large rock and rubbed his forehead in frustration. He had been walking for hours, and it seemed like the valley just went on forever. His legs ached, his stomach growled from hunger, and his mind felt clouded with doubt. What was he even doing here? He had no destination, no plan, just the vague hope of finding something to hold onto. The baby dragon sat at his feet, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. It nuzzled against his leg, as though trying to comfort him, and Kale couldn't help but smile. There was something about the dragon that made him feel less alone. In the vast emptiness of the valley, with nothing but mountains and trees, the dragon's presence was like a light in the darkness. "I don't know what to do, little one," Kale said, looking down at the dragon. "I can't just keep wandering aimlessly." The dragon chirped softly, as if agreeing with him. Its tail flicked back and forth, and it nudged Kale's leg again. Kale sighed. The dragon needed him. That much was clear. But Kale wasn't sure if he was the right person to take care of it. He had never been responsible for anything but himself. Yet, here he was, in the middle of a wild valley, trying to figure out how to survive with a baby dragon in tow. Maybe we'll find something soon. Kale said, standing up. Come on, let's keep going. As they continued, the day grew colder, and Kale began to feel the weight of exhaustion settling in. His feet were sore from walking for so long, and his stomach reminded him it had been hours since he last ate. The valley was becoming more difficult to navigate. Dense patches of thorny bushes, sharp rocks, and uneven ground made the journey slow. But the dragon stayed close behind, its little claws never straying far from Kale's footsteps. After another hour of trudging through the rough terrain, Kale spotted something in the distant sand-overgrown path that led up to a small rise. There were ancient stone ruins scattered along the path, as though the land had once been part of a grand civilization. Intrigued, Kale pushed forward, hoping to find some shelter or, at the very least, a place to rest. When they reached the rise, Kale stopped in his tracks. At the top of the hill stood a large stone structure, half crumbled from years of neglect. The walls were covered in moss, and vines hung from the broken windows. Despite its worn appearance, there was a sense of something important about it, as though it had once been a place of great significance. The baby dragon seemed to sense it too. It paused at Kale's side and let out a soft, almost mournful sound. Its eyes scanned the ruins, and it took a few cautious steps forward, as if drawn by some invisible force. What is it, little one? Kale asked softly, but the dragon didn't answer. Instead, it padded forward, its small feet making barely a sound on the grass. Kale followed, curious about the dragon's reaction. When they reached the entrance of the ruin, the dragon hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. Kale glanced around, feeling uneasy, but the structure seemed empty, no sign of life or danger. He took a deep breath and followed the dragon inside. The air inside the ruin was cooler, carrying the faint scent of earth and stone. Sunlight filtered through the gaps in the walls, casting strange shadows on the floor. The room they entered was large, with high ceilings and broken columns lining the walls. There was a strange stillness about the place, as though it had been untouched for centuries. The dragon wandered deeper into the room, its wings fluttering slightly as it explored the area. It didn't seem afraid of anything. It seemed drawn to something in the far corner of the room. Kale watched as the dragon moved toward a stone pedestal in the center of the room. The pedestal was old, covered in moss and vines, but there was something about it that made Kale's heart skip a beat. The dragon nudged the pedestal with its snout, and Kale stepped forward cautiously. As he neared the pedestal, he could see that something was carved into the stone, a symbol, worn away with time, but still recognizable. What's this? Kale muttered to himself. The dragon chirped again, this time more urgently, as if it wanted Kale to understand something. Kale reached out and brushed his fingers over the carving, feeling a strange warmth pulse through his fingertips. It was as if the stone itself was alive, responding to his touch. Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled, and the room seemed to shift. Kale stumbled back in surprise, his heart racing. The baby dragon immediately took a defensive stance, its tiny wings flaring out slightly as it growled softly, eyes alert. What's happening? Kale whispered, but the dragon's warning was clear. Something was changing. The room seemed to come alive with an ancient energy, as though the ruin itself was waking up after a long sleep. Kale turned to the dragon, who had moved to the center of the room, its head held high. The little creature was standing taller now, more confident, as if it had found something important here. The dragon chirped again, this time louder, and Kale felt a chill run down his spine. Before he could react, the air around them shifted. A strange light filled the room, and Kale felt a surge of power unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was like the room itself was alive, and the dragon, small as it was its heart. He looked at the baby dragon with growing realization. This wasn't just a random encounter. This creature, this dragon, was somehow tied to something far bigger than he had first understood. He had always thought that the valley was just another stretch of wilderness to cross. But now, Kale was beginning to understand that there was more to this place and more to the dragon than he could ever have imagined. Kale's mind raced as the air around him shifted. The room in the ancient ruin seemed to hum with energy, its stone walls vibrating as if they were alive. The baby dragon stood at the center, its wings slightly spread, a glow flickering in its amber eyes. For a brief moment, Kale thought the ground would give way beneath him, but the trembling stopped as suddenly as it had started. The dragon's presence was more than just comforting now, it was powerful. There was an ancient magic in the air, and Kale could feel it. He took a cautious step toward the dragon, who was still watching him intently, its gaze unblinking. "What is this place?" Kale whispered to himself, barely daring to speak above a murmur. The feeling in the room had changed. What had once seemed like an old, forgotten ruin now felt like a sacred space, filled with a kind of energy that Kale couldn't explain. He glanced around, his eyes drawn to the symbols carved into the walls. They were familiar, yet alien, strange markings that looked like they had been etched there centuries ago. The dragon let out a soft, almost mournful cry, as if urging Kale to understand. It paced in a circle around the pedestal, its movements fluid and graceful. Then, without warning, it flapped its wings and jumped up to the pedestal, resting its tiny claws on the stone surface. Kale felt a chill run through him as the dragon's presence seemed to activate something in the room. The stone pedestal shifted slightly, revealing hidden carvings beneath the surface, glowing faintly with a golden light. The symbols now seemed to make sense, their shapes and lines forming an intricate pattern that Kale felt he should recognize, though he couldn't place where. The air in the room felt heavy, as though something ancient was waking up. Stirring from a deep slumber, Kale moved closer, his feet carrying him to the pedestal. Drawn by an invisible force, the baby dragon's gaze met his, and in that moment, Kale knew that this was no coincidence. This dragon, this creature, had been waiting for him. This ruin, this place it was meant for them to find together. Slowly, Kale placed his hand on the pedestal, his fingers brushing against the glowing symbols. The moment he touched them, a sudden flash of light burst from the stone, filling the room with a blinding brilliance. Kale stumbled back, shielding his eyes with his arm. When the light faded, the room was still, but something had changed. The dragon, still perched on the pedestal, looked at him with a new intensity. Its eyes glowed brighter now, as though something inside it had awakened. It hopped down from the pedestal, landing gracefully on the ground at Kale's feet. There was a deep, almost unspoken understanding between them now. "Are you trying to tell me something?" Kale whispered, more to himself than to the dragon. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he felt a deep connection to this place, and to the creature that seemed to have been waiting for him all this time. The dragon chirped softly and stepped toward a corner of the room, where another set of carvings appeared to be etched into the wall. Kale followed it, feeling an odd sense of urgency. He wasn't sure why, but he felt compelled to see what the dragon had found. When he reached the wall, Kale's eyes widened. The carvings here were more detailed, more intricate. They depicted a story, an ancient tale of dragons, of fire and sky. The images told of a time long before Kale had been born, when dragons roamed freely and protected the land from forces of darkness. But there was more to the story. At the center of the wall was an image of a dragon, not like the one before him, but larger, more regal. The dragon's wings were spread wide, its eyes glowing with the same amber intensity as the baby dragons round it. There were figures, human figures, gathered in a circle, looking up at the dragon with reverence. It was clear from the images that these humans were not fearful of the dragon. They were worshipping it as though it were a guardian, a protector. Kale's breath caught in his throat. He realized then that the baby dragon wasn't just any dragon. It was something far more significant, something linked to an ancient prophecy. The dragon on the wall was its ancestor, and the humans surrounding it were the ones who had once protected the dragons. But there was more. In the final panel, a great darkness was creeping over the land. The dragons had fought bravely to protect the world, but they had vanished, their legacy all but forgotten. "What does this mean?" Kale asked, his voice barely a whisper. He turned to the baby dragon, who was now perched beside him, its eyes fixed on the carvings. It let out a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and nuzzled his leg, as if urging him to understand. Kale stepped back from the wall, his mind spinning with questions. The pieces were starting to come together, but it didn't make sense. Why was this dragon, this little creature, here? What was its connection to the ancient protector that the carvings depicted? The dragon seemed to sense his confusion and chirped again, more urgently this time. It hopped up to the pedestal once more, as if calling Kale to follow. Kale hesitated, but the pull of the dragon's presence was too strong. He moved toward the pedestal and placed his hand on it again. The moment he did, the room shifted once more. The pedestal slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, Kale found a small, weathered book. The cover was made of leather, cracked with age. But there was no mistaking it. This was a journal of some kind. It was ancient, far older than anything Kale had ever seen. With trembling hands, Kale opened the journal. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, sketches of dragons, and strange symbols. But the most striking thing was the text. The writing was in an old language, one Kale couldn't understand. Yet, as his eyes scanned the pages, something strange happened. The symbols seemed to come alive in his mind, shifting and rearranging until they formed words he could read. The last dragon of the kin. The chosen one shall awaken. The guardian will find its protector, and together they will save the land from the coming darkness. Kale's heart pounded in his chest. The words on the page were clear now, and their meaning struck him like a blow. The baby dragon, the one that had followed him from the storm, was the last of its kind. And he, Kale, was the one chosen to protect it. He looked down at the dragon, who was now sitting at his feet, its eyes glowing brighter than ever before. There was no doubt in his mind now. This little creature was no ordinary dragon. It was a guardian of a long-forgotten legacy, and Kale was its protector. A heavy silence filled the room as Kale absorbed the weight of this new truth. The world was changing, and the darkness that had once been sealed away was rising again. It was up to him and the dragon to stop it, but Kale didn't feel afraid. Instead, he felt a deep sense of resolve. He had a purpose now, a mission that was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. The baby dragon may have been small, but its legacy was ancient, and with it, Kale would face whatever came next. The discovery in the ruins weighed heavily on Kale's mind as he walked through the valley, with the baby dragon at his side. He had learned so much in such a short time, yet there were still so many questions unanswered. The journal, the carvings, and the ancient prophecy all pointed towards something much larger than he had ever imagined. He couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The dragon wasn't just a companion. It was a key to something important, something that Kale now had a duty to protect. The land was in danger, and the darkness that the carvings spoke of was slowly creeping back into the world. Kale glanced down at the baby dragon, who was trotting along beside him, its eyes wide and alert. There was an intensity in its gaze, a strength that Kale hadn't seen before. The dragon had grown more confident in the time they had spent together. It seemed to understand the gravity of the situation as much as he did. "Are you ready, little one?" Kale asked softly, though he wasn't sure if the dragon could understand. Still, the creature let out a chirp and nudged Kale's leg with its tiny head. It was as if it was saying, "We will face this together." Kale smiled. Even though he knew there was much ahead of them, he wasn't sure where they were going, but it felt like the valley itself was guiding them. He had no clear destination, but his heart told him that they had to move forward, that the prophecy had set them on a path that would eventually lead to the answers they needed. But as the days passed, Kale couldn't shake the feeling that something else was out there, something darker than the storm that had nearly destroyed him. The further they went, the more uneasy he became. The valley, once peaceful and serene, seemed to be changing. The air was thick with tension, and even the wind felt colder than it should have been. Every step they took felt like they were being watched. One evening, as the sun began to set, Kale made camp near a small creek, hoping for a peaceful night. The dragon curled up beside him, its body warm and comforting. Kale stoked the fire and sat back, watching the flames dance. The crackling sound of the fire was the only noise in the stillness of the valley. Just as Kale was about to relax, he heard a noise in the distance. A rustling, faint but unmistakable. His hand instinctively went to the sword at his side. though he knew it was unlikely that something as small as a sword would be enough to protect him from whatever lurked out there. The dragon stirred beside him, its head snapping up, ears twitching at the sound. Kel's heart began to race. He stood, his eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. The noise came again, this time closer. Then he saw them figures moving swiftly through the underbrush, their shapes barely visible in the fading light. "They're here," Kel whispered, dread filling his chest. The figures were getting closer, and he could feel the danger approaching. The dragon let out a low growl, its wings flaring out in warning. Kel took a step back, pulling the dragon close to him. He wasn't sure who these figures were, but one thing was clear: they were not friendly. The first figure emerged from the shadows, tall and cloaked in dark robes. Its face was hidden, but Kel could make out the glint of steel at its side. More figures followed, all dressed in similar dark clothing, their movements swift and silent. Kel's grip tightened on his sword. These weren't travelers or lost wanderers. They were mercenaries, and they had come for the dragon. "Stay back," Kel ordered, his voice steady but filled with warning. "This is your only chance to turn away." The cloaked figures stopped, eyeing Kel and the dragon with cold, calculating gazes. One of them, a woman with dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the dim light, stepped forward. Her voice was smooth, but there was a dangerous edge to it. "We've been tracking that creature for days," she said, her tone even. "You're in our way." Kel felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. "You won't take it," he said, trying to hide the fear in his voice. The dragon, sensing the threat, growled louder, its amber eyes flashing with anger. It stepped forward protectively, its tiny wings spread wide. The woman's eyes narrowed, and she reached for a dagger at her side. "You don't understand," she said, almost calmly. "The dragon is the last of its kind. Its power belongs to those who know how to use it, and we'll make sure it serves the right purpose." Kel's stomach churned. This wasn't just about capturing a creature. These mercenaries were after the dragon's power, but he couldn't let that happen, not after everything they had been through. He stepped in front of the baby dragon, positioning himself as its shield. "No," Kel said, his voice firm. "I won't let you take it. I won't let you harm it." The mercenaries looked at each other for a brief moment, and then, without warning, the woman lunged forward, her dagger raised. Kel barely had time to react, but the dragon did. With a roar, it leapt into the air, its wings beating powerfully, sending a gust of wind that knocked the woman off balance. She stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding the dragon's sharp claws. Kel seized the opportunity, drawing his sword and charging at the remaining mercenaries. He had no choice but to fight. The dragon was too young to defend itself, and Kel had promised to protect it. He wouldn't fail now. The clash of steel echoed through the valley as Kel and the mercenaries fought. It was chaotic. He was outnumbered, but he was fast and determined. His sword clashed with their blades, each strike carrying the weight of his desperation to keep the dragon safe. The dragon darted in and out of the fight, its small body surprisingly agile as it used its claws and wings to ward off the attackers. Kel's heart raced as the battle wore on. Sweat dripped from his forehead, and his muscles screamed with exhaustion. But he didn't stop. Every time a mercenary got too close to the dragon, Kel was there, pushing them back. His sword cut through the air, deflecting blows and forcing the attackers to retreat. But then, as Kel blocked a strike from one of the mercenaries, he felt a sharp pain in his side. He gasped, stumbling back as blood began to seep through his clothes. The woman had returned, and this time she had a sword of her own. She had caught him off guard. Kel fell to one knee, clutching his side. The woman smiled coldly, stepping closer, ready to finish him off. But before she could strike, the dragon let out a terrifying roar, louder and fiercer than before. Its wings flared open, and his body glowed with a brilliant, fiery light. With a sudden burst of energy, the dragon surged forward, its claws slashing at the woman's arm. She screamed, dropping her sword as she stumbled back in pain. The dragon didn't stop there. It unleashed a stream of fire, blasting the remaining mercenaries away with a force that sent them crashing into the trees. The valley shook with the force of the dragon's power. Kel watched in awe as the dragon's strength filled the air, the very ground beneath them trembling. The mercenaries, now scattered and burned, retreated, their plans thwarted. Breathing heavily, Kale stood up, his hand still clutching his wound. He looked at the dragon, who was now standing tall, its wings spread wide. It had saved them. The baby dragon turned its amber eyes toward Kale, its gaze softening. There was a moment of quiet understanding between them. Kale had known all along that this dragon was special, but seeing its powerful hand left him speechless. It wasn't just a creature to protect, it was a force of nature. "Thank you," Kale whispered, his voice hoarse. "We're in this together." The night after the mercenaries had attacked was quiet. The valley, which had been filled with tension and chaos, now felt almost peaceful again. But Kale could feel the change within himself and the dragon. The battle had made things clear. There was no turning back. Whatever this dragon was, whatever destiny had brought them together, it wasn't over yet. The fight with the mercenaries was only the beginning. Kale sat by the fire, his side still aching from the wound he had received during the fight. He had managed to patch it up, but the pain was persistent. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, but he was too exhausted to keep watch. The baby dragon, now more alert than before, lay curled up next to him, its small form warm against his leg. Its golden eyes never strayed far from Kale. For a while, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled, sending occasional sparks into the air. The dragon's steady breathing was the only sound, apart from the distant call of an owl. Kale stared into the flames, his mind heavy with thoughts. The dragon had saved him. That much was clear. But Kale was starting to realize something else. The creature wasn't just a companion, and it wasn't just a force of nature. It was a part of something much bigger, a guardian meant to protect not only itself, but the entire land. Kale wasn't just a protector. He was a part of something ancient. He glanced down at the baby dragon, which had begun to nuzzle against his leg, its small claws lightly scratching at his pants. "I don't know what we're supposed to do next," Kale murmured, more to himself than to the dragon. "But I do know one thing. I can't let anyone hurt you. Not again." The dragon looked up at him, its amber eyes softening. For a moment, Kale thought he saw something in its gaze, understanding, maybe even a kind of sadness. The bond between them was undeniable. The dragon was no longer just a creature he had found in a cave. It was a friend, a protector in its own right, and together, they were something much stronger than either could be alone. Kale reached down and gently stroked the dragon's head. It responded by nuzzling against his hand, purring softly. The warmth of the dragon's body made Kale feel a little more at ease. But the moment was fleeting. There was something out there, something darker, something that Kale couldn't yet fully comprehend. The next day, they continued their journey through the valley, following the faint path that seemed to wind toward the heart of the mountains. The air grew colder as they moved deeper into the territory, and Kale noticed that the landscape was changing. The once lush, green valley was now sparse, with jagged rocks and twisted trees that seemed to be slowly dying. The atmosphere felt oppressive, as if the land itself had been drained of life. At midday, they reached a high ridge overlooking the valley. From there, Kale could see the full extent of the land, rolling hills, forests, and rivers, but it wasn't the beauty of the view that caught his attention. It was the sense of foreboding that hung in the air. A dark cloud had gathered on the horizon, and it wasn't just a storm. The sky seemed to be shifting, as if the very heavens were trying to warn them of something terrible that was coming. "This doesn't feel right," Kale said quietly, his voice tinged with unease. He turned to the dragon, which stood beside him, its wings half raised as if sensing the same disturbance. The baby dragon let out a low growl, and for the first time, Kale saw a flicker of fear in its eyes. It wasn't afraid of the mercenaries, but this was different. This was something much worse. Kale's heart sank as he realized that whatever lay ahead, they were walking straight toward it. As they descended from the ridge, the ground became harder to navigate. The path was rocky, the earth cracked and dry beneath their feet. The further they went, the more the world around them seemed to darken. The dragon's steps slowed as if it, too, could feel the weight of the land pressing in on them. By evening, they had reached the base of a tall mountain, its peak hidden in the clouds. The air was thick with the scent of something ancient, something old and forgotten. Kale felt a chill creep up his spine, but he pushed it aside. They had come this far. They couldn't turn back now. Suddenly, the dragon stopped, its wings flaring wide. It let out a sharp, almost desperate cry, as though calling out to something. Kale froze, his heart pounding. The sound echoed through the valley, bouncing off the walls of the mountain like a warning. "What's wrong?" Kale whispered, but the dragon didn't answer. It was looking up at the peak of the mountain, its eyes wide and fearful. The dragon took a few steps forward, its tiny claws clicking against the stone ground, and then it stopped again. As if it had reached the end of its journey, Kale felt a tremor in the air, a pulse of energy that made his skin tingle. He could feel it in the ground beneath his feet and the air around them. Something was happening. Something that had been buried for centuries was waking up. Then he saw it. At the top of the mountain, barely visible through the swirling mist, there was a faint light. It flickered like a flame, but it was not like any light Kale had ever seen. It pulsed with an eerie energy, as though it were alive, calling out to the dragon. "No." Kale whispered, his voice trembling with fear. He knew what this was. The prophecy, the legends, the journal that had all been leading to this moment. The darkness, the force that had once threatened the world, was returning, and it was calling for the dragon. The baby dragon let out a low, mournful cry, and Kale felt his heart twist with the weight of what they were about to face. The dragon wasn't just the last of its kind. It was the key to stopping this ancient evil from rising again. "We can't let this happen," Kale said, determination filling his voice. "We'll stop it, together." But as he spoke, the ground beneath them rumbled. The earth shook, and the sky darkened further. Kale looked up to see the light at the top of the mountain grow brighter, its glow now almost blinding. The dragon stepped forward, its wings spread wide as if preparing to take flight. Kale reached out to stop it, but the dragon turned to him, its amber eyes filled with understanding. This was it, the final battle. They had come this far, and now they would face the darkness that had been waiting for them. "I'm with you," Kale said, his voice steady as he stood by the dragon's side. "Let's do this." With a final roar, the baby dragon spread its wings and took off, flying toward the mountain's peak. Kale followed, his heart filled with a mix of fear and resolve. Together, they would face whatever waited for them at the top.